Hi everyone, Alex here from Alex and Books, and my guest today is Aun Abdi from 1 Minute Book Review. Thank you for joining us today, Aun.
Pleasure to be here, Alex.
So we've known each other for a couple years now. We've talked on Instagram, but this is one of the first times we're meeting face to face. And I'm sure a lot of people are just meeting you for the first time. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. My name's Aun. I am from the UK. Live just about 20, 30 miles away from central London. And I currently work as a business analyst. And on the side, I have my book review channel where I talk about some of my favorite books. That's called 1 Minute Book Review. I've been doing that now for probably 3 years, probably been about 2, 3 years, on and off a bit. There was a stretch of time I didn't really post anything, but yeah, it's been great. Met some amazing people, yourself included, and yeah, I'm just excited to see where it goes from here. To be fair, so got some exciting projects in the line and some things that we're working on. So,
Awesome. So before we jump into 1 Minute Book Review, I'd like to
Mhm.
ask, have you always been a reader in your life, or is this something you picked up later in life?
So I've always been a reader, especially when I was younger, because my mum's an English teacher. So she did a degree in English and art. So we'd always grown up around books, both art and literature specifically. So classic literature in particular. So I was big into reading when I was younger, but more on sort of the literature and the fiction aspect of reading. Not so much to do with, the personal development stuff that came, after university, that I kind of gone into that when I was starting my first job. So I was always reading, and I was reading children's books. I don't like the word children's books, but you know what I mean. Um, like series. I wasn't big into fantasy, but I read, like, there was an English author called Robert Muchamore, called the Cherub series, and I don't know how many copies they had, how many were in the series. I think it was like 10 or 11, and it was about a guy who was an orphan, and then he got recruited to MI6, like a version of MI6, and it goes through what he used to go through his training. It was really cool. And yeah, so I read all of those. I read the first Harry Potter book, then got bored. Didn't watch the movies as well. Everyone tends to ask me, "Is like, oh, you must have read all the Harry Potter books, and then you must have watched the movies." I'm like, no, I haven't. It just doesn't interest me at all. And then yeah, I was big into. I studied English literature, and at high school, it would be high school in America, but I was like 17, 18. So I did a lot of poetry. I did a lot of, classic English literature. So Shakespeare, Macbeth, Hamlet, all that kind of stuff. So that is kind of my background to reading. And I kind of started to read more when I went to university. When I studied politics and international relations, and I was reading widely on academic journals. I was reading widely when it came to political theory, philosophy, psychology, and I did different modules in different subjects. So it was at that period of time where I really started to branch out, because the advantage of being at university and studying something like politics is we you might have 6 or 7 hours of lectures a week, and you have a reading list. They give you a reading list every single week. So you could basically just go sit in the library for the whole week and just read as much as you want. And that's why you're there. So for me, that was a great opportunity just to like scroll through the library, just going shelf by shelf. There was one time I went there, and I found a 50-volume series on the academic papers related to the Irish potato famine. And I'm like, I've really gone deep and dark into this library. So yeah, ever since that, and then I got my first job after leaving university after a couple of years, and it was at that point that I started to read more sort of self-development books. How to operate myself better in the working environment, and to build up my networking skills. And then I kept the philosophy and stuff there, but it's more gone down the self-development route.
Nice. So yeah, so it sounds like you've been a reader your whole life entirely. And so what was that point in your life that you decided to take it to the next step and start a 1 minute book review?
It was kind of the same time where I got that first job. So my first job was in sort of South London, but I would have to go into London and then back down again. So I was doing like a 4-hour commute daily, and I was on the train for pretty much all that time. And I was like, I wanted to read, and But my issue is every single review that I found of a book was like a couple of pages long, and I'm like, I need something quicker than this. Like, just tell me what the book is going to be in a short few, like a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs, and I can deduce whether it's for me. And that's pretty much where it started. I was like, it was at that point that I read Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuk. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, what can I do? And I was like, well, I wanted to read more, and I wanted to do book reviews. I wanted to find book reviews. I was like, why don't I just do that? And it literally, the 1 minute book review, I literally just came into my mind as soon as I had that thought. I didn't have to do any brainstorming. It was just kind of it just happened. And yeah, it was from there that I kind of created that. And yeah, it's been great so far. I've met so many amazing people, talked to so many amazing people, and yeah, it's been great so far.
Awesome. And how has like your life changed since starting 1 minute book review? I assume like you're reading more books. You're also sharing these books and like reviewing them online. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it's weird. I think it's like a positive feedback loop when it comes to sharing the books that you read, because not only are you benefiting yourself from the books that you read and the information that's inside of it, the perspectives, the ability to use people's personal experiences to your advantage. I can't remember that quote, but you'd probably know it. But it says that a wise man learns from other people's mistakes. I can't remember the quote in exactly. I'm sure you're aware of the quote. I can't remember what it is exactly, but it's always any person can learn from their own experiences, but it takes someone who's a bit more wise to then learn from others without having to have gone through it. And that's what I think is the great thing about reading in particular, and with this page, and what I've learned from myself with sharing this is you develop an inherent sense of self-awareness that just wouldn't have been there before. And it's been the best thing that I've ever done, not only for reading myself, but sharing it, because I think you get twice the benefit in sharing, because not only do you it ingrains what you're learning into practice, because if you don't really know what's in the book and you're talking about it, it's going to be pretty quick until someone can deduce whether you haven't read it or not. So it's that factor of it. So you actually need to know the books and ingest the information and see it from different perspectives. And the second point is you have to, by speaking with people about it, you get different perspectives. Like, for instance, I know you've met Goggins, and we both love Can't Hurt Me, but it's your perception and your key points that you've taken from Can't Hurt Me will most likely be different to mine, based on your history, your perspective, your background, which is totally different to mine in most senses. So that is the thing that I've taken the most out of having the page and talking to people, is ingraining the information within myself, getting that self-awareness, but also learning from others, because I actually learn a lot from the book in the comment section and in the DMs, because people tell me about books and they suggest me books, and they tell me about perspectives that they learn. I'm like, oh, that's amazing, because I didn't even think about that. And that's the great thing about talking about books. That's what I found. Yeah. So selecting, I do a couple of ways. I'm trying to remember how many in total. I'll probably remember as I go through. So the first one, which is my most popular way of doing it, is I look at the bibliography of existing books that I like. So if I come across a book that I like, the one that I always reference in relation to this, because I think it has a great bibliography, is The Obstacle Is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Like, it's got a great selected bibliography. I know Jordan B. Peterson's in 12 Rules for Life has a great bibliography in there as well. And I've actually chosen a lot of my books based on those two books. So that's my first port of call, because if I like a book and I like the material within it, then the chances are I'm going to like the sources of that information. So I think bibliographies, it should be a first port of call for anyone. The issue I have with something like Amazon is they do it based on the genre that the book is in. But I think at times it's best to select authors based on the authors themselves rather than particular topics, because like Ryan Holiday is one of my favorite writers, but he writes on stoicism, but he's also written a book on like The Perennial Seller, which is about how to create long lasting pieces of work that stand the test of time. And that's not related to stoicism, so it wouldn't be categorized in the same way. But because it's written by him, it's written in such a way which is engaging and which I like for myself. So that's kind of the most popular way I do it. The second one I do is just by pure reference. So, the advantage we have is, we're on our feeds every day and we're seeing books come in and out. We're having authors come to us and giving us their books, which to me still blows my mind. And we're just seeing new material. We're following publishers, so we see books coming out, new books coming out, existing books coming out that we weren't even aware of, people suggesting us books that we weren't aware of. So that is also a great way to do it, because people suggest you books and you don't even have to look for them. And then what I've adopted recently, I haven't done it so much recently because we're in lockdown and I wasn't traveling, but what I used to do is I used to use Audible, listen to an audiobook, and then determine whether I actually want to purchase the book. Because when you listen to an audiobook and when you read a book, it's two different experiences, but you can kind of deduce the essence of the book by listening to it, and then it kind of makes me feel like whether I actually want to purchase it. Because with Audible you can buy the subscription but then sell the book back and get another book, so you're just constantly cycling it and then getting new books, and then you can decide. And that's probably my main way to decipher whether a book is good or not. Like, it's very rare that I purchase the book and I'm like, this is not a good book. It's happened a couple of times, but I usually vet it through that procedure. There is some times where I just buy a book outright, but I usually trust the person a lot more to do that, based on references. So that's kind of my way of selecting books. Your second part of the question was related to actual the note-taking aspect, or the way I do it. So I've adapted this over time. So I've got like a step-by-step process. So the first step before starting any book, I kind of have a question or a set of questions that I'm trying to answer before starting the book. So I'm currently reading a book, it's downstairs, called The Sorites Principle, which is How to Harness the Power of Perseverance, written by Ian Gibbs, an English author. And in that book, I've kind of had a question: is how can I find suitable laws to harness perseverance that's not just related to trying harder? Because people think that perseverance is just trying harder, but I feel like there's more to it than just trying harder. There's different elements to it. So that was kind of been my question by starting that book. And I feel like by asking yourself a question, you keep more focus and it enables you to finish the book better. I have a notebook. I have a dedicated notebook for my book notes. So I have that. I have a highlighter, so I highlight everything. At the end of each chapter, I write down the note in my own words, using active recall. I've found that very helpful to improve my memory, but also to understand what's actually stuck out to me in that chapter. Because I think if you go back and just take notes, you're just taking everything. But if you use active recall, you're like, oh, I'm actually remembering that for a reason because it stood out to me and it's actually applicable. And then at the end of the book, I write down sort of 5 principles that have stuck out to me in the book, and things that I want to take. Either that's things that I want to research more or things that I want to implement. So that's kind of my way of going through a book. I'm currently in the process of moving all my stuff in my notebook into Evernote and then put tags on them, so that, I can categorize notebooks and books by tags. So then if I want to find something or a particular thing, then I can just search for it. So I'm currently in the process of moving that along, but it's going to take a while because I've got quite a few notebooks.
Yeah, that's definitely a great strategy. And that's one question people ask me a lot, like, how can I remember more of what I read? And I tell them, it's like, hey, if you want to remember more, you have to put in more work. And like you were saying, before you start reading a book, you think of the questions, then you actually take notes while reading. And then after you finish the book, you try to write down the takeaways, and then you're going to transfer the notes into Evernote so you could have them later. And it's like,
and I do review them as well.
Yeah.
At that point, I forgot that bit at the end, is after I take those 5 principles, I do review them.
Yeah, and that's another great point that you made about the active recall, which is a lesson I learned from Jim Quick's book, Limitless. Is like, before you pick up a book, try to remember what was the last thing you learned and kind of go back over like your notes and your highlights from your last reading session. So you have that, so you're recalling the information that you learned. And yeah, we're learning that this reading isn't just like scrolling your eyes left and right. It's like an active process, something you have to be involved in, and it actually kind of requires a little bit of work, but it's definitely rewarding, and you get what you put in.
So what's your process?
So I'm actually working on a kind of like in-depth article, and I was also going to make a video about it, so stay tuned. Yeah.
Okay. Under construction.
Yeah. I'm trying to trying to like phrase it clearly and I think a video will be very helpful as a way of describing it than just writing a blog about it. But yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah.
So what I really like to talk about, you mentioned a little bit before, you took a little bit of a break from social media, but then you came back on, and I noticed your growth just like exploded this past year. Like,
Yeah.
one, what made you come back, and two, like, do you have any tips for growing your social media following? Because I'm sure you, like myself, were always inundated with questions like, how do you grow your following? How do you do this?
Yeah.
And I think you definitely have some great advice to share.
So my absence of social media wasn't related to social media. It was related to something personal. So that was just something that happened to me personally, and I just had to take time off just because I didn't have as much time to read, and I kind of just completely forgot about social media because there's more important things at times. So that was what happened to me. That's why I kind of went off it, and I came back because that time had passed, and I thought to myself, well, I had something going. Let's keep it going and see what happens. So I started again, I want to say late part of last year, October time, maybe October, November time. And yeah, I kind of implemented the same strategies, but I went a bit harder on Instagram ads, more specifically. And I've been very fortunate at the moment to have, a good steady job, and I had some free resource, so I was like, I'm gonna try this Instagram ad thing, and it just popped straight away. I did some videos, and I run some ads against them, and there's just, yeah, the growth from there increased. I'm not doing them anymore, because I've found, from doing them the last couple of weeks in particular, no, not weeks, months, was that the price had increased, but the reach had just completely diminished because everyone's doing them now. So I'm still growing. So I'm just like, just hold on for the moment. I personally feel like I'm trying to, and I'm sure you're doing the same, is try and get people off the social media platforms and onto a specific website, so you actually have their email addresses, and you can contact them that way. So that's what I'm focusing on at the moment, is how can I extract people from different avenues. So that's my focus on the moment, not just on Instagram but on other platforms as well. So my tips would be, and I actually, one of my friends contacted me today because she's trying to run a non-for-profit climate change sort of page to get people educated on climate change in the UK. And she's like, what kind of tips can you give us to start your channel? And I get this question so much, and I'm sure you do as well, because you're are you approaching 50?
Yeah,
Are you over 50?
I think I'm getting close to like 42 right now.
Okay. Yeah, so it's significant. And even when I think about mine, I still think about when I had like 100 followers, and it was like those 100 followers, oh my god, 100 people are following me, like. And I still now, like, I don't know if I don't know if you're aware, but I do like a weekly Q&A on Sundays, and I take people's questions and stuff, and some of the questions, like some of the places people call me from, I'm like, oh my god, like that's crazy. Like, it's really like Malaysia and Nigeria and Beijing. It was crazy. So my tip is engage as much as you can. I think a lot of people feel like they can just post and sort of post. I call it post and run. It's like they post and then they just like forget about it, and then they just wait till the next day and post again. And I think people don't realize how much work goes on communicating with people in the comments as well as the DMs. Like, the DMs for me at the moment is like, I'm spending most of my time just going through. But I think that is, not only is it necessary for your own growth of your brand, because you have more of a one-to-one interaction in the DM than you would do in any other place, and it's a great way to convert people if you're doing anything else, or you've got any other business. I'm sure for your book, it's a great way to convert people and get them onto that. But it's also your duty if someone's contacting you. Like, I don't know if this happens to you, but when you contact someone and they come back to you and they're like, I wasn't expecting a reply, and I'm like, but why weren't you expecting a reply? Because surely, like, in my naive mindset, is everyone replies to people, but obviously that's not the case. So then I feel like it's even more our duty to reply to them if no one else is doing it, because not only does it give us a leg up on what everyone else is doing, because it's an attention game at the end of the day, but it's also providing them value, whatever they need to do. So I've actually found it very helpful, because people ask me how I take notes and all that kind of stuff, and I just write it down into my notes section on my iPhone. I can just copy and paste it and then leave I've actually found it very effective. I don't know if you do this, is do audio recordings and use that as a message. Like, I don't know if you've done that, but I found that very effective as well, because people get a lot more, like, it's quicker for one moment, like you don't even have to write. And I actually do that when I reply to comments as well. I use the voice thing on the phone, so it does it, like types it all out, and I don't have to like actually type it because it gets laborious having to type comment after comment. And do you use keyboard shortcuts as well?
Yeah, I started using
Yeah,
those. Yeah.
yeah. So I've been using those for quite a while, and it's such a lifesaver. Oh, like it's just so much easier if you just get the same comment and you can just do keyboard shortcuts. But yeah, audio for me has been a big one when it comes to voice messaging in the DMs, because I feel like people get a lot more. It feels a bit more, like it's you, because I think people must feel like people get surprised when like I'm actually the one posting, I'm the one replying. It's like, oh, you must have a team of people. And I was talking to Owen about this yesterday from Unleash the Knowledge, and we were talking about, he wanted to chat about the magazine that we're doing for August, and he was like, so who are you working with, like who's your team? I'm like, me. Like, is like you're just one man show for the time being. Yeah, I've got input from other people and I've got suggestions, but at the moment I'm very careful until I have until I have a set framework and a set foundation. I want to try and keep the creative as close as possible, because I feel like if you get too many people's input when you're not sure yourself, you can get taken on like a whole road that you don't even want to go down. And plus, it's like an expense thing. It's like you want to try and bootstrap this thing. You don't want to try and get external capital, because then you have people's interest, and I don't. That's part of the reason why I wanted to create something or an online business, is I didn't want other people's input. I will do in the future, obviously, hopefully if it grows. But the whole point about starting is being passionate about something and being the person. Like, I want to be the person who posts it, because then I'm in control. I don't want to have to leave it to someone and they write something completely cantankerous, and I have to tell them to take it down because it's already posted and people have already seen it. So if I make a mistake, I make a mistake, and you have to suffer the consequences.
Totally. Yeah, I love what you said about earlier about the don't post and run. Like, sometimes people forget, like, hey, these aren't like just numbers, they're actual people. And I try to take the time to respond to each person. I started using keyboard shortcuts, but I think that voice thing you mentioned is a great way to save time. And so next thing I like to dive into, you've been a reader for a few years now. Are there any reading tips that come to mind for like first time readers or people trying to read more books?
Yeah. So I have a couple. A couple of them are standard when it comes to like the consistency aspect. So, in reference to the book Atomic Habits, start off small, do it consistently. But as great as those points are, I don't think it addresses the root of the issue when it comes to whether you actually want to read, because people have books they like. There's people who contact me in Q&A saying that like they have a library of books. They have a library of books that they want to read, similar to yours and mine, but they can't read and they have the time to read. So then it's not about there's like a barrier to them reading. So I try and ask them I don't ask them what that barrier, because that's not a very good way to put it, but it's more the fact of, what is your purpose of reading? And it goes back to what I was saying when I take notes, is before I start every book, I ask specifically myself, why am I reading this book? If it's to read purely for the basis of giving my opinion on the channel and someone wants my opinion, then that's fine. But I have a rank really in my mind of how I rank my importance of books, if it's for reviews or if for personal interest. And what I found is I'm more likely to read a book if I'm actually interested about it, or if it's something that I want to improve. Like the book Never Split the Difference, to me, was a book that I think I raced through. And, I think I must have taken up a good 10th to 15th of my 10th to like a quarter of my my notebook, because I was like, there's so much in there that I can use, and I was so specific with its purpose. And I think that's the case when it comes to reading. And I think people need to understand that if you want to start reading, read the things that you're trying to improve on, or there's things that you want to do, or there's things that you want to learn, Like, I'm really looking forward to read a book called The Bilingual Language, I think by Alex Costa. I've got it up there, but it's about the importance of the use of language in our society. Now, that's not a book that I think. Actually, I have a better example. There was a book that I read a couple of weeks ago. You might have seen it, but it's called Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. And this is a book that I read purely out of interest because I read it in an article and I was like, this is going to be a great book and a really interesting book, but it's not a beginner's book. Like, it's written in the mid 1980s and it discusses the epistemology of American society and the degradation of society based on the rise of the television. So it's like, it's so specific, it's so complex in its use of language and in its theoretical and philosophical arguments, but I've read it because it interests me, and it was another book that I got through fairly quickly as well. So I think my main tip is, yes, you can find consistency. Yes, do it for 10 minutes, 5 minutes a day. Yes, make sure that you're finding the time and you're reducing the barrier to entry with the environmental design by using ebooks and audiobooks. Those are all great, but try and understand before reading any single book or before any single reading session to start off with is, why do you want to read? Like, what is the purpose?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great tip. Like, the more relatable a book is and the more you could use it in the near future, the more you'll be interested in it and you'll find that motivation to read
and finish it. Sorry to interrupt, but to continue on that point, a lot of people tell me is like, how can I finish the book I'm reading? And I'm like, that is what you like. If you address that first part of that question, then you wouldn't actually have had that problem. Now it's two parts. I feel, well, it's actually a really good point that you're making, but there's two parts. It's like, if you don't finish a book, it's really for two reasons. The first reason is you don't like the way the author is presenting the arguments, which is valid, and that's happened to me, and that's my only reason for not finishing a book, that I don't like the way the author explains the points, or the book doesn't seem to have any particular value when it comes to the way that it's narrative and all that kind of stuff. But the second point, if you don't understand it, that's something different, because then I feel like you're obliged to try and understand it. So you have to take more time to read it. You have to take more time to analyze it, because if you don't understand it, that highlights a flaw in your understanding, which is the whole point of reading. You're supposed to challenge yourself when you're reading. It's not something to say, I've read, 5 books this month. It's no, have you challenged yourself to look at a different perspective or look at something different that you hadn't done at the start of the month or the start of the week? So those are my two reasons when it comes to why you're not finishing a book. So that's something that people need to ask themselves as well, is like, it's okay not to finish a book, but it's, why aren't you finishing that book? Is it because you don't like the author or the way the argument is presented, or is it because you don't particularly understand the concepts? Because then you just have to try and understand it as best you can. Yeah. Yeah, I've got two here. They come to mind. And the second one I'll get to, but the first one was kind of the book that stuck out to me. The book was What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School. And I don't know what it was about this book. Well, I do, but that for me, when I read a book, what I've established by the more I read for myself is, what I actually put above sometimes the actual content of the book is the narrative. See, the thing I love about my favorite authors, and I've actually realized this fairly recently, is me liking a book is very rarely based on the content of that's being talked about. It's more to do with how the author presents the arguments and whether they do it in an engaging way. I reckon I could read a book about slugs, but if that author writes it in such a way that finds it engaging and it, like, oh my God, I didn't know slugs were like that, then it would be a great book. But someone can write a book about something that really I was really interested by, which was like the key tips of something in Harvard Business School, and I just didn't get that much value out of it. And I got about 80 odd pages in, and I just didn't like the way the narrative was split out. It had short paragraphs with like it was broken down into like small paragraphs with like small titles, and I didn't feel like I was reading a story. I felt like I was just reading like an academic manual about things, and I was like, this is just laborious, and this is not keeping me interested and engaged. And it wasn't due to the content, because the content was somewhat valuable, and I think it was presented in a better way than I reckon I could have finished it. But I just didn't like the way in which it was presented. And but I've come across people who love the book. And this is the thing about when you read a book, it's so much to do with your own personal preference on the type of books that you like to read. Like someone who's more science based or has a science mindset, or someone who is, a mathematician would prefer probably a more of a scientific journal kind of feeling when it comes to reading. And I've come across people like that. But with my background in politics and more specifically studying philosophy and psychology, I like the narrative, I like the storytelling, and that just didn't have it. The second one, it is contentious within the book review community. It's Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And the thing is about this book is I like the premise of it. So I like the premise of the idea that in anything we do in life, more specifically, a major life decision is important to start with why. And this term has become somewhat of a a thing within our family that we joke about. Like anything we do, we say, yeah, we do a Simon Sinek. We start with why. And the reason why I have a gripe with this book is because of its. You could read the first chapter and you could be like, yeah, that it's basically everything else is just a riff on that first chapter. And he specifically only really references Apple, and it's difficult because I understand as an author that you write a book like this and you can almost feel like he's struggling to write enough material. And I feel sorry for him, like about 3/4 of the way through the book, because I'm like, oh mate, you're really clutching at straws here to try and keep this book going, because he's probably got a contract with who is it, Penguin Business, and he's probably thinking, oh, I need to get, I don't know, 300 odd pages out of this, so let's see if I can elongate this out. But those were a couple of books that come to mind. I think there must have been some more, but I've probably given them away. That's what I tend to do.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on Start With Why. Like, you could just read the first chapter or two and you get the premise of it, and the rest of the book is just kind of stories, just to support his point. And a lot of books are like that, because when you have a publisher, like, the book has to be thick enough so that you could write the title on the spine of the book. And Naval had this great quote that most books should be blog posts, actually. And yeah, if you have a blog post that you can't just make it any shorter, then you should make it into a book and not vice versa. Because there are
Who said that? Sorry, Alex?
Naval Ravikant.
Naval Ravikant.
Yeah, he's considered like an angel philosopher. He founded AngelList, which invests in like a lot of startups.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, he has a great quote about that. And yeah, once you think about that, it's like a lot of books that I read could be a lot shorter, and the best books are the ones that like had to be that length. Like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, I feel like that had to be a long book. Like, that book just had so much great information. And so I like to go in the opposite direction and now talk about maybe like one or two books that had like a huge impact on your life and how they changed you.
Well, it's funny that you referenced 12 Rules for Life, because I think that one's up there. For me, it was one of the first books that I read when I started this channel. And for me, I know you've met him. I saw the photo and I was super jealous. You've met so many authors. I was like, wow, that must be the benefit of being in a major city. But yeah, for me, I've read it, I've listened to it on audiobook, I want to say probably near enough double digits, and I've read it probably 3 or 4 times. I just reference read it now, so if I want to go back to any chapters and reference it or review that material, I do. I think it's an incredibly insightful book. I love the fact that it was born out of a blog post, and it was originally like 40 or 50 rules. I can't remember the exact number, and he had to whittle it down to 12. Yeah, there's so many. I actually think the best thing about it is the bibliography, like we've talked about before. But the way in which it's written, the way the points are labeled out, his narrative, his ability to storytell within the text, even though he's a trained psychoanalyst,
psychologist. Yeah, one of those. I think psychologist.
One of those two, I think, are psychologists. Yeah, trained a clinical psychologist. That's the one, clinical psychologist. Um, his ability to storytell, his ability to state his arguments based on the material is quite incredible, and it was a great introduction to me to read Maps of Meaning, which is possibly the most complicated book I've ever read. And I I think the reason why that book had such an impact on me is it was at a time in my life in my early 20s where I just started my first job and I was kind of thinking about what I actually wanted to do, and it forced me to go down a road of self awareness and self introspection, which led to read more and read amazing books such as the Gulag Archipelago and Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and Friedrich Nietzsche. And there was so many books. Alfred Adler. Like I think more people should read Adlerian psychology. More specifically, everyone knows Freud and Jung, but no one knows Adler. But I think Adler is possibly the most effective psychologist that we could use at this day and age to give us some sort of framework to live in some way. And for me, that was a book that I think opened the doors to so many other books and so many other avenues, and that's kind of what happens. Another book that always comes back to me is Can't Hurt Me, just because of the pure motivational factor of that book and the story. Every time I love the audiobook. I don't know if you listen to the audiobook. The audiobook is to me on a different dimension to the actual physical copy. Every single time I listen to chapter 4, which is Taking Souls. Chapter 4, I think. I can't remember the exact chapter. I think it's chapter 4. I just, before I even finish the chapter, I'm already got my running shoes on. Like it's infectious for action, and that's why I think that I love that book. And when you have a full-time job, when you're like me, I'm still studying for my qualification, and when you're running this channel, and when there's so much that you need to do, as well as balancing your life in general, and obviously finding time to read, you almost sometimes surrender yourself to the idea that you're limited. And by reading a book like that, you're basically just told that you as a human are limited up to a point, but most of the time we are fed a narrative that the issue I have with general society, and I know probably a bit off topic here, but it's we, and I'm saying this we because I've been susceptible to this now and in the past as well, is we're almost force fed how we're supposed to live. What is the right way to do things? What's the wrong way to do things? And like I have people who say to me, my work colleagues, and they talk to me about, this Netflix they've watched, this program that they're going to watch. And I'm like, I'm just not going to watch it. And they're like, well, why aren't you going to watch it? And I'm like, I'm just not going to watch it. Like it's not that I judge people who do. That's just not me. That's just not how I want to live my life. And I feel like people are very quick to judge how others should or shouldn't live their life. And I from reading a book like that and reading a book, and I'll get onto the other book in a second, but it's somewhat related to this, is that knowledge that just because you're doing something and no one else is doing anything similar doesn't not only does it not invalidate what you're doing, but it shouldn't stop you from doing it as well. And it shouldn't stop you from pushing to your boundaries, because you open up a door of things. And that happened to me, especially with my running. And it's very specific to the book, but it's something that I actually applied from reading it the first time around, is any form of exercise actually. And I'm really missing going to the gym, if I'm gonna lie. Like that's the one thing I'm really missing about lockdown, is I was in such a good routine, and going to the gym was just such a great time just to go and push myself to the limit every day, with deadlifts, with lifts in general. And I didn't realize how much I missed it, like when I've stopped doing it. I tried that with running, but it's sometimes it just doesn't. I just don't have the same feeling with extended periods of running. I was due to do a half marathon in May, but that obviously got cancelled, so that's been delayed till next year. But yeah, I can't wait till the gym's open again. The third book I would say is related to what I was talking about with Adlerian psychology. That's The Courage to Be Disliked by Chiro Kashimi and Ichiro Fugataki, I think. Great book, based on a conversation between a philosopher and a student, based on the the validity of Adlerian psychology. So the premise of the book is comparing etiology with teleology. So the idea of Freud had a theory based on etiology of cause and effect. So if you were suffered trauma as a young man or as a child, then you're more likely to basically inflict that onto someone else in the past. Whereas Adler believed in teleology, or the idea that trauma isn't real, but only real to the extent that it shouldn't affect how you will act in the future. So if something's happened to you, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do that yourself. And, both play out in the real world. That's why it's difficult to say which one's better than the other, because people are abused when they're younger and they do go on to abuse others. But at the same time, people suffer horrific trauma and, they get through it and they do something positive with it. But it definitely did shed a light on a perspective that I wasn't aware of, and on a psychology that I wasn't aware of. And it made me go out and read Understanding Human Nature by Alfred Adler. I don't know where it is. Somewhere I rearranged my bookshelf a couple of weeks ago, so I don't know where I put it. But yeah, it's a great book, Understanding Human Nature. Great book. And yeah, those are the three that I always kind of think about that really stood out for me as being sort of not life changing, because there's no one book that I've read that has changed my life. The way I see it, it's like a foundation. Every book you read sort of builds a wall, like a proverbial wall of understanding, and you find the commonalities between the books and you find things that appeal to you. But I think those three books, since reading, and I've only read for a short period of time in the grand scheme of things, 3 years, but the advantage that we have with running these pages, it gives us the accountability to read more, because if we're not reading, then we're not posting, and we're not posting, we're not growing. So it's sort of that's that positive feedback loop when it comes to reading. So those are kind of the books that stand out to me, and I'm actually really interested to see what you say, because I know one of them would probably be 12 Rules for Life.
Yeah. So 12 Rules for Life is one of my favorite books of all time. Can't Hurt Me, like you mentioned, incredible book. Just reading that book, it got me jogging. I started jogging 5 miles every Saturday morning, no matter whether or not I went out Friday night, whatever time I went to sleep. It was like I ran in the rain, I ran in the snow, I ran when it was windy. I think at one point it was like 12 degrees Fahrenheit, which just super cold outside. And I actually signed up and ran 10Ks because of it. So yeah, like it's incredible that a book can motivate you. Some words on a page could motivate you to go outside and run. So that was fantastic. And the book that got me into reading was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. So I highly recommend that book as well. Yeah. And like what you were saying about Goggins, he has this 40% rule where when you think you're done, you're only about 40% done, and there's so much more to go. And yeah, if you don't put a limit on yourself, your potential just grows exponentially. And you want to be that uncommon person amongst uncommon people. Like if you just do what everyone else does, you're going to be average and you're going to get average results. But if you want to be, above average or an outlier, you have to do things that are going against the herd, going against the norm. So I think
yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, but I almost think if someone's questioning you, then you kind of you're doing the right thing. If someone's saying, "Well, why are you doing that?" Yeah, I'm like, okay, that's what I was waiting for that, because it means that you're doing something that's worthwhile. Because if someone's questioning you about whether you think they should do it, they inherently don't want to do it, and there's a reason behind that. And that's usually the fact that it's something worth doing. So it's a great point you're making about when someone says, questions you.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, so I read 2 of the 3 books you mentioned. I'm definitely going to look into the third one. And so we're getting close on time here. So I'm sure a lot of listeners want to learn more about what you have going on and where they could learn more about you and follow you on social media. Can you tell them where to go and what you're up to?
Yeah, so my Instagram handle for 1 Minute Book Review is at 1 Minute Book Review. I launched a community page how long ago now? Probably 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. It's done really well. So it gives people the opportunity to repost their content. Because what I was finding is a lot of people they don't have a lot of friends that talk about books. So I created the community engagement page so people can find other people to talk about books. And it's a great way for me to grow my community, if you want to call it that. So that's doing really well. That's at OMBR Club. I'm currently updating that website with a couple of things, and yeah, today, in fact, we just launched Book Talk Today, which will be a online book magazine that will feature reviews, articles, and interviews with authors. That's due to be released for first publication on the in August, end of August. I haven't got a specific date yet, but it will be the end of August, and that will be available on the App Store, Apple, Google, Kindle, and on our website. So super excited about that. Still working out who we want to have on that front cover, but yeah, we've already done some interviews, and we're just waiting and sitting on. So the thing that the start of that one was, I had done authors interviews, but I felt like it didn't fit in with what I was doing with the 1 minute book reviews, and I kind of wanted something to not only discuss books with authors, and their books in particular, but also a way for people to get involved in the actual content making process. Because what I'm finding is a lot of people actually want to contribute to the stuff that I'm doing, without anything in return, which to me is amazing. And I was like, well, what can I do? Because like I said, I'm very protective over my personal content, but if there's something that's different, then I'm a free reign. I'm an open book. So I looked at other people and what they're doing with online magazines, and I thought can be a great thing for not only from a business point of view, but from a community engagement. So today we launched that, and there's a form at the website booktalktoday.com, so you can go out there and put your name down, and you can contribute, and you can write articles, you can write reviews, you can, I'm kind of just leaving it up to people to write what they want to, and then if it fits in with the publication for the month, then we'll put it in, and yeah. So those are the kind of things that I'm working on at the moment. That's taking up a lot of time, because that's not only designing it, that's not only coming up finding the best tools for publishing and marketing, but it's also finding the authors, having the authors interviews, writing, collating. But I'm super excited about that one, because I think not only for me as my brand and what I'm trying to do with my things, but also for getting people involved in reading. I think I'm really excited about it, and I'm really excited to have it on an app or something, so it's actually out there for people to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, any way that you could increase or grow your community and just encourage more people to read, I think is a fantastic goal to have. And I really love the work you're doing, watching you grow, and I'm looking forward to seeing your projects come to life. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to talk today, Aun.
You're welcome. It was great speaking to you. Like we said before we started, it's been sort of 2-3 years since we've been speaking, but we've never had a face-to-face conversation. It's the weird thing about social media in general. I think it gets a lot of bad rep, but I think if it's used in the right way, it can really provide a lot of value. So yeah, it was great speaking to you. So thank you for having me on.
Totally. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.